Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and this is part 26 of our series on changes following a likely Russian victory in Ukraine. As the Russian victory in Ukraine gets closer, so does the recognition that the U.S. foreign policy goal of maintaining U.S. hegemony in the world is unrealistic. Gets more widespread. Anger against the United States is rapidly growing in France, in Germany, and the states of Northwestern Europe, and maybe in such places as Italy, as well. These states, though, have paid dearly for the support that they've given to Ukraine. And their peoples are preparing a political disaster for their governments. When that particular disaster comes, it will be a miracle if NATO survives, and if the fallout from its disintegration does not result in major changes in U.S. foreign policy. I think you have to be blind not to see this coming. I know the power of the mainstream media, in this country is probably now greater than it ever has been. Well, maybe it's not if you think the alternative media is draining off supporters, from the mainstream media, but it still seems like they have a huge amount, of power. And the unity of their views with respect to the hegemony of the U.S. seems also to give them a coherence that stops people from seeing the truth. I think the truth is that the hegemony of the United States, is now gone. Well, what's happened to it? Well, one thing that's happened to it is the grip that the U.S. dollar has had on the world for so long, is visibly slipping. It's been slipping for some time. Perhaps a decade ago, it was at 72% of transactions. It's now 58% of transactions. And the BRICS nations, very soon to be at least 11 and maybe 12 strong, are pledging to each other that they're going to transact business in local currency and not transact business, in the U.S. dollar. So the economic power of the U.S. dollar seems to be failing. Just recently, Japan and China, and Saudi have all been getting rid of a lot of their dollar bonds, on the open market. There are other people that are buying the dollars. There's no information that I see on the currencies that are being used, to buy the dollar bonds. I don't know whether the trade is going on in local currencies, okay, or whether the Chinese and the Japanese and the Saudis are limiting the sale of their dollar bonds, but $2. In other words, they're looking to redeem these dollar bonds before they mature. It would be very interesting to know that. But still, it looks like there's a flight away from the dollar going on. Secondly, the diplomatic hegemony of the U.S. Is also gone. These days, we seem to have no successful diplomats. We have people who go around the world and basically threaten other nations to try to get them to do what we think is the right thing for them to do. And they are rejecting what our diplomats have to say to them on a wholesale basis because of what they're saying. We are not proposing deals that actually benefit both sides. We aren't using diplomats who have been diplomats for many years and who know about all the niceties. When our diplomats go to other nations of the world, they're not being welcomed, as of old. We seem to be lacking diplomats who are skilled in how to be polite and how to deal with people, in other countries, how to show respect for the people they deal with and for the countries they are visiting. Instead, our diplomats often seem to be using veiled threats of one sort or other. There's a third dimension of our loss of influence also. That relates to the military dimension. We have been fighting wars for so many years with forces that are not equal to ourselves, that we're used to fighting basically guerrilla activities rather than fighting the conventional armies. And we've been developing capabilities for fighting those wars and letting our capabilities for fighting conventional wars actually deteriorate. In what ways are these deteriorating? Well, our production capacities are deteriorating. We have no surge capacity. If our client states run into trouble with respect to the proxy wars that they engage in or have to fight, and they're outmatched, for example, by Russian artillery, which is going on, in Ukraine every day, outmatched by many, many times. We have no surge capacity to supply the Ukrainians with. We've been running out of ammunition to send to them. We've been sending them that were built at Wonder Weapons, but all these Wonder Weapons have their Russian counters. It must look to people, in the world that we don't right now have any superior weapons to the Russian counters. In days gone by, we were. indisputably the number one military power, in the world. This was especially true with the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But during the 90s, we were certainly unchallenged in terms of our military power. We could therefore throw our weight around. The people who call themselves, our diplomats at this time seem to think we can still throw our weight around. But, in the Ukraine proxy war, it seems as though NATO has proven to be a paper tiger. The most advanced weapons, of the alliance, when they're sent over to Ukraine, don't seem to be able to match the Russian conventional weapons. It seems as though the Russians are outmatching the NATO equipment in every category. And the outmatching comes because the Russian production capability to produce more of everything is far greater than our capability to send weapons to Ukraine. Everybody across the world is now seeing this. They're seeing that the military capability of the collective West is failing, in Ukraine. And that emboldens other nations to take actions they perceive are in their interests. These actions often manifest themselves in coups d'etat, in nations of Africa, for example. Things also manifest themselves in pink tide elections, in South America. Now, our secret services, the CIA in particular, respond, of course, with coups of their own, in Latin America. For example, they threw out Pedro Castillo, not so long ago. And he is locked up. But meanwhile, the coup is being challenged by indigenous protesters. Indigenous protesters in Peru. Demanding new elections. And it seems like the coup government we installed does not have the will or the power to resist these without any direct intervention by the United States in terms of sending our own troops there, which we can hardly do since we're trying to build up our military power in other areas of the world, such as the Pacific. We are limited to CIA support for the cousters inside of Latin America in country after country. We can still cause instability and we can cause problems, but we don't seem to have the power to set up stable right-wing governments that can last for years against the challenges of the indigenous populations. Once again, people all over the world see this. They see the hegemony of the United States is ending. They see that our power to enforce our will is ending. And it's ending all over the world. And as I just said, that is encouraging other nations to test us and test us, okay, and test us again. That is happening, okay, in the Middle East. It is happening in Africa. And it is happening in Latin America also. Many other nations in Latin America and in Africa too are doing things we warn them against, are doing things we don't like. Now we're trying to set up a situation, okay, in the Middle East where we create, okay, an alliance between a formal alliance between the Saudis, okay, and the Israelis. Yes, our people are talking about it and they're trying to pull people together. But it doesn't seem like Saudi Arabia is very receptive. They seem to be much more receptive to working within the BRICS alliance right now. Of course, we still try to pull off a diplomatic coup there, but it seems impossible to create one because the Israelis will never give up their ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Okay, they're just unwilling to agree to do that. And without their agreeing to do that and agreeing to guarantee Palestinian rights going forward, the Saudi regime will never create a formal alliance, okay, with the Israelis, no matter how much we try to bribe them. So, our efforts to maintain hegemony in Latin America, in Africa, in the Middle East, all seem to be going for naught. As the effort in Ukraine continues to fail, and I have to add here that any reasonable person at this point has to be expecting a withering Russian counterattack. Okay. The Ukraine counteroffensive is clearly losing steam. I don't think the Ukrainians have the weapons. I don't think they have the manpower. I don't think they have the expertise to continue the offensive, which, by the way, in more than 3 months, has hardly gained any ground at all and is nowhere near a breakthrough of the 3 Russian defensive lines. They haven't even gotten to the first of the defensive lines. They're still fighting in the gray zone. After 3.5 months, 71,000 Ukrainian fatalities reported, huge losses, okay, in equipment. What have the Ukrainians got left to fight with? They are running out of steam. The prognostications are that in 2 or 3 weeks, this vaunted counteroffensive of theirs will be done. Meanwhile, the Russians are adding to their reserves. They reportedly have they have 750,000 men they can commit to the Ukrainian theater right now. And they're getting stronger each month. Their army is growing larger and larger. Supposedly, they're planning a withering missile attack but over the next 3 weeks, aimed at destroying the electrical grid, inside, of unprecedentedly destroying the grid, in Ukraine. Once again, they've evidently been stockpiling missiles for that purpose and getting ready to unleash those missiles. Whether that will be in concert with a new ground counteroffensive, I cannot say for sure, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see Putin try a knockout blow with respect to Kharkov, or using the Ukrainian pronunciation, Kharkiv, with respect to the port, of Odessa. Many people think that they will cross the river and easily roll things up until they take Odessa once again. And many others think that they will make an attempt to knock the Ukrainians out of the war by taking Kyiv and shutting down their government, which would mean that we would again use the Russian pronunciation, Kiev, in referring to that city. It's reported by many that the Russians don't really want any part of Western Ukraine. And if they knock out Kyiv, it would be for the purpose of taking over the government and installing their own puppet. Whereupon they would likely create a rump state whose capital would be Kyiv, which would be run by a puppet of the Russians, no longer seeking any NATO membership, or EU membership, but only seeking a neutrality biased towards the Russians in return for the granting of their right to continue to exist. If that happens, the war would be over through the Russians imposing their will. If that becomes the result for the whole world to see, it would be a monumental defeat for the collective West, for the Europeans, and for the United States. We'll have to wait and see whether that happens over the next couple of months. But I have to say that I think it's most probably going to happen. When it does happen, there will be a tremendous loss of prestige for NATO, for the nations of West Europe, and of course for the United States. And the European peoples who are preparing a political disaster for the current governments will, of course, be boosted by a very, very increasingly angry population, which will also be a population suffering a big downgrade, in their economics. Many people have remarked on the deindustrialization, of Germany. And by the efforts of the United States through use of the Inflation Reduction Act, to get German companies to headquarter their efforts here in the United States, because they can massively lower their fuel costs. It is said that with the pipeline gas from Russia gone, that the price of gas in Western Europe, certainly in Germany, is now 4 times what it was before the war, because American companies insist on profiting on price gouging, on making hay while the sun shines, while the German economy sleeps into recession, and not only into recession, but into to deindustrialization, which is a calamity for German culture, as well as the economic system, and for the German self-image. There will be demagogues, in Germany, who will be trying to respond to the need to elevate the German self-image in the face of this kind of defeat. There will be demagogues in France who will be doing the same thing, because Macron will be viewed as having failed so badly. The same will happen in other European countries. Think of the Meloni regime, in Italy. It will get stronger. It will make hay out of this particular situation. So will right-wing politicians in the nations of Northwestern Europe, and Northern Europe. It will be a miracle, if NATO survives all this. If the Russians impose their peace in Ukraine, as I've described it, and they then back off and make no threats, to Europe, and even try to restore the means of distribution of the pipeline gas and offer it, to Europeans, that would do much to sever the relationship between the United States, and Europe. There are states, in Europe who will try to maintain the closest of ties. For example, the Baltic countries, Romania, and Poland, of course. They will want to maintain alliances with the United States. But from the Western countries' point of view, the attack by the Americans on the Nord Stream pipeline will be seen as the act of an ally who betrayed the alliance they are a part of. Therefore, if NATO continues to exist, the remaining countries of NATO may well expel the United States. What would you do if an ally betrayed you? So, these are the things that may happen over the coming months. They would not surprise me at all. They should not surprise you. Okay. Furthermore, if that's the scenario that happens, and the Russians turn to the West again, trying to be friendly, restoring the pipeline trade, being generous towards the nations, okay, of Europe, why would those nations ever go back to an alliance with the United States? If they perceive a peaceful Russia only interested in doing business with them and trading with them, why would they keep up the alliance with the United States? We could very well be expelled, okay, from Europe. I don't think that would be so bad for us. I don't think that would be so bad for Europe. But that would be perceived here in the United States as a major defeat and a major loss of prestige and status. I don't know how we would react, okay, to that. Can you imagine Germany asking U.S. troops, okay, to leave, demanding that Ramstein Air Base be closed down? What an impact that would have if a new German regime wanted that. Meanwhile, we have been turning to the Pacific in an attempt to maintain the hegemony of the US. So here we are. We're failing in Europe. Things don't look good for us in Latin America or Africa, okay, or the Middle East, where nations are combining against us and the maintenance of our power in these regions. Meanwhile, we're trying to construct but new alliances in the Pacific, talking to various nations about how we can help them counter a Chinese threat. But the problem there is, where is the Chinese threat? China seems only to want to do business. Come one, come all. They don't seem at all interested in fighting. Now, the United States may try to provoke them into a fight. But, and this is very important, we do not have the military advantage we once had, okay, in the Pacific. Chinese missiles can easily down our carriers if they get anywhere near the Straits, okay, of Taiwan. They have very accurate missiles, very good missiles. They're getting hypersonic missile technology from Russia, as are the North Koreans. We don't have that technology yet. We are not ready to provoke a war, okay, in the Pacific. We don't have the hypersonic technology. We don't have the capability to shoot down the hypersonic missiles. We might be more powerful than China near the United States. In the area of the Pacific that's near the United States, but in the area of the Pacific that's near China, we don't have the military capability to counter China. So why are we trying to provoke, a war when the military capability is not there? We all should know by now that in all the war games we have conducted in recent years, all the simulations we have conducted in recent years, we have always lost to the Chinese when it comes to conflicts close to China's shores and close to Taiwan. Those simulations show that we don't have the capability. And I am not aware of our defense industries creating newer super weapons that can counter the Chinese local missile advantage in that particular theater. Chinese, of course, will be supported by the Russians and by the North Koreans. They will stand together, not because they were all communists, but because they were all nationalists and want to prevent their countries being dominated by the United States. Once again, we must recognize we don't have the military capability to dominate them anymore. Why? Because in the verbally aggressive Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, we kept on increasing the defense budget, but we never took care to actually produce the military equipment that would be necessary to give us the capability to actually counter the Chinese. Meanwhile, they were spending far less money, as was Russia, but they were spending it on military capability that was relevant to defending themselves and to developing a long-range offensive capability against us. They were not spending their money on how to fight basically guerrilla wars in unfriendly climates. They were not preparing for wars like that. They were just preparing to defend themselves against us and to develop a long-range capability that was greater than ours. So, only spending a fraction of what we spent, they were able to develop a military capability which allows them to continue to pursue the foreign policy they want to pursue while just refusing to engage militarily with us. Where will we provoke a military confrontation? In what area of the world we will do it where we have superior military capability? There is no place where we can cause the Chinese to engage us except with respect to Taiwan. and China itself. As I've said, China's military capability is superior in the Taiwan Straits. If we provoke them into starting a war, in the China Straits, in the Taiwan Straits, they will quickly roll up our military capability there and easily conquer Taiwan, half of whose population is in favor of reunification with China anyway. How are we going to maintain such a war with China at such a long distance? How are we going to mobilize our people to convince them that we should be fighting such a war? Why would our people want to do that? In order to maintain the unilateral hegemony of the United States over the whole world? I don't think Americans are particularly motivated to do that right now. Of course, the administration will try to grease the wheels of propaganda to claim that the Chinese represent an existential threat, to the United States. But if all the Chinese do is continue to do business as best they can with everybody on Earth, how are people going to believe that they are an existential threat, to the United States? I don't see the propaganda machine being able to work, to do that. So I don't see the government having the capability to mobilize long-term effort to become superior in military capability once again. I don't think the American public is going to support that kind of spending. I think our population has too many other needs that have gone unfulfilled for far too long by administrations that were talking tough but had no real interest in building our capability and in building the inner strength of our country by creating an economy that was healthy for all of us. So that's the way I see the future in this part 26. I basically see America as either continuing to risk, a nuclear war, which would be a disaster for all of us, or alternatively, conducting a retreat to our home ground, in North America. Either one of those two things is going to take place. I certainly hope it's retreating to North America and retreating into an economic collaboration with the rest of the world to serve the mutual interests of all of our countries. But in order to do this, of course, we have to have a change in our foreign policy. And what are the prospects for that change? Well, right now, the Democratic National Committee is making rules up to openly rig the primaries so that only Joe Biden can possibly win. They're moving to make the primaries a farce, so no one will believe that they are honest. And so Robert F. Kennedy, in particular, won't have a chance, to win. They're standing behind Biden as the only possible candidate. While Biden's cognitive decline now appears to be, increasingly rapid. I was aware of Biden's cognitive decline in 2020, of course. We all were. But we thought that he still would be capable, of beating Trump, and we hoped that his forces would conduct a meaningful resistance against the threat, of Donald Trump. But he hasn't been conducting, a meaningful resistance. He thinks a meaningful resistance means propaganda against Trump. He thinks a meaningful resistance means various kinds of prosecutions against Trump, which he's also pursued far too slowly. He doesn't see that a meaningful resistance against Trump was not only to do those things, but also to increase the internal strength of America by pursuing policies that would make everyone prosperous again. He has been rather ineffective, at doing that from the very first, when he went back on his pledge to give people $2,000 checks, when he failed to pass the child tax credits as permanent child tax credits, when he failed to slap down the right-wingers, in the Democratic Party from the get-go, instead trying to compromise and deal with them while forging compromises that made things worse for everybody else supporting the Democrats. He weakened the United States internally with his policies, rather than strengthened the United States with those particular policies. He left a gaping fracture, among us all by not solving real problems, by not pushing to solve the real problems, by not using the bully pulpit to silence the right-wingers, in the Democratic Party. So domestically, he failed when it came to resistance. He didn't realize resistance had to be more than formal. It had to be real, by empowering democracy in the United States and building democracy in the United States. Instead, he has weakened democracy in the United States with his maneuvering and his propaganda machine, and is trying to run an inverted totalitarian system rather than a democratic system, thus continuing to opening the way to a victory of fascism here at home. But to go back to foreign policy, Biden has introduced an appreciable risk of nuclear war and devastation for the first time since the 1980s. He has been running a ruinous foreign policy. Trump, if he gets in again, would probably this time install a dictatorship. But in foreign policy, if he follows the pattern of his first term, he will install neocons again, who will pursue a hostile Chinese foreign policy, thus continuing to expose us to nuclear risk. So the question is, what is the prospect of the United States rejecting nuclear risk, accepting the multipolar world, accepting peace, and growing economic relations with everybody else in the world? What is the prospect for that happening in the United States if either party is allowed once again to take over? I say that the prospects are nil. We must get rid of the political system we have now. We must get rid of this two-party system. And we cannot do it without getting rid of the donors who support and strengthen this dysfunctional political system. You know how we get rid of the donors. I talk about that on Wednesdays and Fridays. Then I talk about the corruption effort that we need in order to get everybody coming together to vote using the rule so that we can clean house in Congress, clean out 1/3 of the Senate, and displace both Trump and Biden and their horrendous foreign policies with people unbought by the military-industrial complex and all the other industrial complexes that have sprung up, the health industrial complex, the fossil fuel industrial complex. We need to get rid of the oligarchies from the various industries that are dominating our political system. And the only way to do that is to make the donor money toxic by voting against all candidates who are taking the big money. That's what we have to do, and we have to do it between now and 2024, or face a continuation of the ruinous foreign policy of Biden, or the likely to be ruinous foreign policy of a new Trump administration, which, remember, even during Trump's time, was turning towards China to try to pursue a hostile policy towards China. By the time the 2024 election is over, the Ukraine war will be settled. But nuclear risk will then be coming from our foreign policy in Asia. And both parties will be involved in that. If we want to remove the nuclear risk, we must remove the politicians of both parties who were bought by the defense industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the deep state industrial complex. We must remove all those candidates who are beholden to them and replace them with candidates who are not taking any big money, but who are only beholden to us because they raise money through small donations alone. That's what we must have. We are running out of time. Our very existence is at stake. There is an existential threat because we're trying to provoke the other powers with greater nuclear delivery capability than our own. We're trying to provoke them into a war, which we will either lose, or if we ever start to win these wars, they will have recourse to superior nuclear capability than our own. And we will be risking our continued existence and the existence of the whole world. This is a trap, folks. And the only way we can get out of it is by getting rid of the toxic money. It's by dumping the corruption. Tomorrow night, we will have another Dump the Corruption show where we'll be discussing those issues. I hope you will tune in. I hope you liked this stream. I see that there are 2 of you here, but I don't see any comments, which is very strange. But anyway, thank the 2 of you for coming, whoever you are. And I hope somehow we manage to spread this stream far and wide, because I think my argument in it was particularly cogent and particularly timely, and my warnings are also particularly timely, though time is running out for us to change the situation through a mass movement of the people, a bottom-up movement of the people, not beholden in any way to big money. It is up to us. We can save the United States and we can save ourselves. But we have to get behind the no big money rule. So once again, I am going to leave you with that rule. And you can contemplate it. You can contemplate it as I end this stream. Thank you again for coming. I will end the stream right now.